Very good. It's 7 o'clock. We have a great reputation here at the IWT for being strictly punctual. So uh, we're going to start. I want to welcome everybody to this webinar. I don't really want to say Happy New Year. It's probably a little bit late for that, but this is our first webinar for 2021. In effect, it is Happy New Year to a lot of you who may have turned up for the webinars that we held before Christmas. I'm delighted to be hosting this evening. My name is Pádraig Fogarty. I'm the campaign officer with the Irish Wildlife Trust. The Irish Wildlife Trust is a national non-governmental charitable organisation, and we rely on your membership and your participation to do the work that we do. So do check out iwt.ie and support us if you can. Just for some housekeeping before we get on to the main event tonight, you will see at the bottom of your screen that there is a Q&A button. So if you have a question, you can put a question into that anytime you want, and we'll get to it at the end of the speakers. So the speakers will speak one after another, and then when they're all done, we'll have the Q&A. So make sure you put your question in the Q&A rather than the chat. I won't necessarily be monitoring the chat, so please do put questions to the panelists in the Q&A. Just to let you know also, this webinar will be recorded, or is being recorded, and we will be posting it to our YouTube channel later in the week. So I was saying to the participants earlier, we've had absolutely phenomenal demand for registering this evening, and obviously there's great interest in the subject, but unfortunately then a lot of people who wanted to register weren't able to. So if you know somebody who was keen to see it, do make sure to send them the link to the post later in the week when it's online. Now, without further ado, we'll get on to the main event. So we're going to talk about some of our endangered bird species this evening, and many of you will be aware of the fact that we officially are in a biodiversity emergency. I say officially because it's nearly 2 years since the Dáil declared we have a climate and a biodiversity emergency. Not that an awful lot has been done about that so far, but that's for another day. But I think looking at our birds in particular, you can see why we have a biodiversity emergency. It's 2013 since BirdWatch Ireland came up with what they called their list of birds of conservation concern. So they looked at all the bird species in Ireland, and they found that 37 of these birds are on their red list. So this is, I suppose, equivalent to endangered with extinction or critically endangered. And many of them, like the quail and the nightjar, for instance, either haven't been seen in years, or we only have, very scant evidence that they're even breeding anymore in Ireland. And 90 of the species on BirdWatch's list are on what they call the amber list. So this is kind of the medium danger zone. So that's really quite phenomenal that more than half of the birds, about 185 species, were assessed for this work. And over half of them are threatened in this way. So it's really quite shocking. On the other hand, of course, we know that some work is being done to address this. And so that's why I thought tonight would be very, very interesting to hear some of the stories and some of the work that is being done. So we're going to hear about 3 of the birds that are under serious threat in Ireland, and the work that is being done to reverse that trend. So we have 3 speakers for you, but first up, we have Ryan Wilson-Parr, and Ryan is an accredited upland ecologist, and he works as a project scientist for the Hen Harrier Programme. Ryan has over 20 years experience studying the Hen Harrier and over 15 years professional experience in ecological monitoring, planning, impact assessment and conservation. Ryan is currently reading for a PhD at Galway Mayo Institute of Technology, testing the effectiveness of a results-based approach to agriculture in high nature value farming landscapes. And I suspect that we will hear more about results-based and high nature value farming as the evening goes on. So Ryan, can I ask you to share your screen when you're ready, and the floor is yours.
Okay, Padraig, can you see the screen?
We can see the screen, yes,
Great,
and we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, thanks very much for the introduction. My talk over the next 15 minutes is going to be about the Hen Harrier programme, give a bit of context to the threats and pressures the Hen Harrier faces in Ireland. I'll talk about the programme, how it works, and then go into a bit of detail as to what the deliverables are for the programme and our expectations. So the Hen Harrier is a bird of open uplands, traditionally nesting in heather moorland. This would be an example of perfect Hen Harrier habitat. Unfortunately in Ireland, most of our uplands don't look like this. They look more like this. And that's a key part of the problem. This is the view of the 12 bens, and you can quite see that there's very little heather cover there. It's mostly dominated by Millennia. It's overgrazed, and it's kind of very deteriorated state, very bad conservation condition. But it's not just the Hen Harrier that we're focused on. The Hen Harrier is like an umbrella species for an awful lot of upland biodiversity and birds. An example of the kind of plight of this kind of guild of upland birds can be demonstrated with this kind of bowl of eggs. And all these birds have something in common. They're all ground nesting birds of uplands. And Padraig talked about the birds of conservation concern and the list of those birds in Ireland. So it might be worthwhile just to set a bit of context to show the range of pressures that exist within the whole ecosystem. And I guess first up is this egg here, which is the meadow pipit. This is the main prey species of Hen Harriers in Ireland. And this is red listed, which is hard to imagine. The next species up in uplands is the golden plover, again red listed. Next is the ring ouzel, probably one of our rarest breeding birds and probably close to extinction. The next one is the grey wagtail, which is usually found in upland streams. We have here the red shank, another red listed bird of uplands. The curlew, which Kathryn is going to tell us a bit more about after this talk. The red grouse, red listed. The dunlin, red listed. So it's hard to imagine that this tells its own story. The bird we're interested in is the Hen Harrier, which predates all these birds and is amber listed. So there are huge challenges for the Hen Harrier in Ireland. This was the distribution of Hen Harrier not so long ago. You can see it's quite widespread across most of upland areas in Ireland, apart from the west. And if we zoom forward to 2015, you can see a huge shrink in the population and distribution of birds. So we've gone from 200 to 300 pairs in the 1970s. And in 2015, at the last national survey, we have 108 confirmed pairs, with possibly up to 157 territorial pairs. So that's a 52% decline in 40 years and a 33% decline in 15 years. So the scale of the challenge is huge. We operate within a network of special protection areas designated for the protection of breeding Hen Harrier. In 2005, a national survey was undertaken, and that was our baseline data to identify the most important sites within the country to support breeding Hen Harrier, and these were then designated as special protection areas. The designation itself proved a challenge in the fact that there was a very poor consultation to landowners as to what the designation meant. Many farmers that we spoke to in our original consultations said it was a rather strange designation. They didn't really know why the land was being designated, what it meant. They didn't really know what the restrictions were on farming, and especially became very convoluted in places where there was a double designation of SPAs and special areas of conservation. So there was quite a lot of misinformation at the time. It created an awful lot of confusion and resentment, as you could understand. In these areas, it's not just about conservation. The programme hopes to tackle an awful lot of the socio-economic challenges. During designation, there was apparently promises that farmers would get meaningful supports to help them manage the land as it was designated in Natura 2000. But unfortunately, the money that was drawn down by the government in the last RDP was modulated away from these farmers into other schemes. A big challenge in uplands is farm viability. An awful lot of our farmers have off-the-farm jobs, and the farming is part-time. It's also not very profitable. There's also a big issue about who's going to take over the farm in the next few years. An awful lot of farmers in our uplands are within the 50 to 60 age category, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of those farms being passed on to the next generation. So there is a big succession crisis in the next 10 to 15 years. There's also an awful lot of issues around policy, which kind of conflict with hen harrier conservation in Natura 2000. One of those is eligibility implementation. So that's where farmers are maybe penalised and incentivised to remove the very habitats that are important for biodiversity and the very habitats that we pay in our scheme. Also, in these upland areas, they have been targeted for Sitka spruce forestry, and forestry offers a very high premium compared to agricultural schemes. Because there was a ban brought in forestry because of the known negative impacts of forestry on hen harrier, it means that farmers can't access Natura 2000 funds to keep farming, and there's no access to forestry grants to get out of farming. So in our programme, we're trying to identify the problems that farmers are facing, try and offer meaningful supports, while also delivering ecosystem services, opening up a new product that farmers can tap into and get paid for. So this pilot programme will run between 2018 and 2022. Our objective is to ensure sustainable management of high nature value farmlands and provide benefits for hen harrier and also the species on which their habitats depend also. Our second objective is to try and tackle some of those socioeconomic challenges in marginal farming and provide a very positive and effective model for future farming. That would be the results-based schemes. Our third objective is to try and remedy a lot of the kind of negative press that the hen harriers had, and also a lot of the negative experiences that farmers have had through designation and the lack of meaningful supports. So we want to foster this positive relationship with our farmers participating in the scheme and their biodiversity outcomes. So our operational area, we do cover a very large land area. We cover 9 counties and 6 special protection areas. There are around about 3,700 farmers who draw down basic payments within the 6 special protection areas. That equates to roughly around 56,000 hectares of farmland in the SPAs. So our programme has quite a significant budget to try and bring as many of those farmers into the scheme as possible. It's a €25 million budget over those 5 years, which makes it the biggest results-based programme in Europe. So how does it work? Well, it's very different. It's not a traditional farm scheme, purely because the farmer has an input onto its development and design. When we first started the programme, the farmer was central to how the programme was set up and the issues it was meant to tackle. It was also voluntary for the farmer, so he or she can apply or leave at any time. There's no payment per hectare, which is the conventional agri-environment scheme. It's more flexible and it's a pilot project, so we can adapt and change as we need to. And it's not prescriptive. So a farmer in the programme does not need to abide by an X, Y, and Z approach. The farmer can put in as much as he wants or she wants into the scheme. And that obviously links to what they get out of it in terms of payments. So the basic principles are it's voluntary. It's got to present an opportunity for farmers. It's got to reward them as well for delivering a lot of these ecosystem services that public and society as a whole value. So the message for farmers in the programme is that the hen harrier is important and has value, and they should be able to access some of that. So the role of the project is to design and implement the programme, manage our payment system, also provide training to the farmers and advisors that the farmers need to score and assess their lands. We also need to monitor the hen harrier population within the SPAs, and we also need to inform stakeholders of our progress to make sure that we're delivering on our objectives and also learn from it. We also incorporate an audit as part of our programme to make sure that the money is being well spent and that the concept of the programme is working. So the results-based is based on payments for 2 things. One is the quality of the habitat on the farm, and the other payment is for breeding hen harrier. So the payments are directly linked to these 2 things. And there is also an actions-based payment where farmers can draw down money to help them maximise their habitat payment. I'll explain a bit more about that later. So there's a results-based payment, which is the farm payment paid annually. There's the supporting actions payment that the farmer can draw down money and co-funding. And then there's the bonus hen harrier payment. So it's a points-based system, it's not a per hectare payment. And the way that works is each habitat type that we identify on the farm, whether it be wet grassland, scrub, heath or bog, that's given a relative value. And we also multiply that relative value by the area. So there is an area part of the payment. We also make sure that each field parcel is scored between 1 and 10 based on habitat quality. And then each point is valued. So an example would be a typical farm where it has a bit of bog, a bit of grassland, a bit of scrub. They would have a relative value. Based on their score, they would have an estimated amount of points available to convert into cash. So we convert the points into money with a tiered system. The first 1,000 points has a monetary value, and then we break it up the next 1,000, and then anything above 2,000 would have a lesser value. So there's a range of payments the farmer can avail of depending on their habitat quality. So there's usually a kind of minimum and a maximum amount, and we assist the farmer to try and improve the habitat quality on their farm over the lifespan of the scheme, and also to maximise the payments that they can draw down in the programme. At the moment, we have just over 1,500 participants, which is equivalent to 37,000 hectares of agricultural land. This equates to 65% of the SPA agricultural land farmed by our participants. So key to the programme is a habitat assessment. So the farmer has to have the habitats assessed every single year and gets paid accordingly every single year. We do this by using scorecards, and we make this as simple as possible by breaking it down into 4 habitat categories: wet grassland, bog, heath, scrub, and species-rich grassland. We then develop these scorecards, which are developed with the hen harrier in mind, and each of these scorecards are like a multiple choice questionnaire as to what characteristics of the farm provide the most benefit for hen harrier. And the advisor, when he walks each single field, gives an appropriate score based on each multiple choice question. We have developed also ways in which we can improve the efficiency of this. So the programme has developed an app based on, the advisor can use it on Android devices and mobile devices. And it basically allows a very quick way that the advisor can score the field without having to go back to the computer. It gives us real-time information as to where the advisor is when he scores the field, and also the amount of fields that have been processed during survey period between May and August. So it's quite a huge task to try and manage 18,000 fields being scored annually through the programme. Hen harrier farmer advisors, we trained roughly around about 85 advisors. This is my colleague Caroline, who's providing botanical training. And each advisor undertakes training every single year of the programme. And the farmer chooses an advisor who operates in his area. The farmer deals with the advisor directly, so there's no kind of middle ground between the programme. A bit of detail as to, well, what is farming for hen harrier? What does it actually mean? What does the farmer have to do? Well, as part of the programme, we offer supporting actions payment. So in addition to the farm payment, the farmer can draw down a certain budget each year. And this goes towards improving the functioning of the farm, improving livestock management. So infrastructure like gates, fencing, piping, we co-fund that to a certain percentage. And also we encourage habitat enhancements that benefit biodiversity and the hen harrier, and we co-fund them at 100%. So the farmer gets to choose what actions, if any, he can put in place to improve his score and maximise his payment. So what does it mean? Well, farming on the ground, here's a typically cross-section of a hen harrier farm. On the left-hand side, we have improved agricultural lowlands. And then as we increase in elevation, it becomes more wet, more acidic, and becomes more rushy, wet pasture, and occasionally species-rich grassland. And then in the upper reaches, it becomes more heath, bog, low-intensity grazing. So this gives a good indication, really, as to how the hen harrier is using the landscape and how we score the farmer as well. So the farmer can draw down actions, but also these things can be voluntary as well. One action would be the removal of self-sown conifers. So immediately the farmer can improve the score and payment by doing this. Ways in which you can improve habitat structure is to maybe target dominance of purple moorgrass during the summer months. Another example would be bracken control. So the scorecards try and capture damaging activities or where there's an excessive amount of scrub in the field parcel. So we would co-fund a certain amount of bracken control. We'd also co-fund where it's appropriate scrub rides, which not only kind of brings a lot more land into active management, but also improves structural diversity within the landscape for hen harrier. We also incentivise rotational grazing in a lot of these rushy pastures because the scorecard captures vegetation structure, which is really important for hen harrier and other biodiversity value in the farm. We also provide funding for upgrading existing fencing. So that's important for control of livestock around these parcels to achieve these optimal vegetation structure. We also co-fund hedgerows, where these are poorly developed in a farm where field boundaries are low scoring. There's an incentive there to for the farmer to put in hedgerows, and this increases green corridors and connectivity across the farm. We also co-fund targeted grazing infrastructure. So in places where there's direct access to watercourses, we can put in temporary electrical fencing to stop livestock polluting or eroding watercourses. And then there's also options for farmers who have low scoring fields where they probably wouldn't get a payment. And we provide funding to put in wild bird cover strips. But that isn't fixed. The farmer can come to the programme with anything, and we will happily co-fund it if it's appropriate. So attaching a value to the hen harrier is really important. And we do this by having a bonus payment for farmers. And this is like a pot of money, which is split between all eligible farmers. And there's two parts to it. One is a local nest bonus and one is an SPA bonus. So farmers can be paid on one or both. The only criteria is that they must have one field that has a score of 6 or higher. So they must be demonstrating that they're providing quality habitat. The maximum payment is €60 per hectares, or up to a maximum of 1,200 per farm per year. And the hen harrier payments are paid in spring, so they're kind of meant to coincide with the hen harriers coming back onto the breeding grounds, so they have more kind of relevance to the farmer.
Just 2 minutes there, Ryan, please.
Okay, I'm not far away, thanks. The SPA level bonus payment is to recognise that contribution from the farmer. So if the hen harriers are doing well within the SPA, then all farmers in the SPA get to avail of that bonus payment where they're providing quality habitat. The local nest payment is that if hen harriers nesting within proximity to the farmer, they get a share of that bonus fund. And where a nest is successful, the farmer gets an extra bonus fund. So the farmer shares in that kind of success. And also we share in failure as well, so that's really important. It gets buy-in from farmers and also places a value on the hen harrier. To link these payments directly with hen harrier, we do have a team of skilled surveyors out monitoring hen harrier. This is Shane O'Neill, who's part of our team, watching hen harriers. And so it's a very intensive part of the programme, and it links directly to our calculations and also allows us to gauge performance and how the hen harrier is doing. So the results today are generally quite variable. There's a huge variability across the SPA network, as you can see. A number of our sites have gone under huge declines since baseline data in 2005. The most notable of those are the Slave Otty Mountains, which straddles County Clare and County Galway, and also in the Stacks to Mulligate Mountains, which covers Limerick, Kerry and Cork. So there's been huge declines in several SPAs. There has been a few occasions where the population has improved. Mulligadish to Mushermore would be an example where this year was a very productive year. But overall, the total number of pairs has declined in the SPA network, and there are more hen harriers outside the SPA work than inside. So we can see from the graph there on the far right-hand side, there is still a slow decline, and in the last few years there has been an incremental on-year decline of maybe 1 or 2 pairs. When we look at the number of pairs, it doesn't tell the whole story. Breeding density is a good metric, but what is important is the number of birds fledged per each SPA. So it's quality, not quantity. and that is hugely variable across the SP network. Last year was a kind of average year for the number of chicks fledged. There was a high level of predation in some sites, and it's a bit of a shame because we couldn't really build on the really high fledging success of 2019. So it's very hard to predict. When we look at the fledged young per confirmed nest, this is our key piece of information. For the population to be self-sustaining, the productivity has to be 1.45 young per confirmed nest. And at the moment, what looks like a rather kind of spaghetti on a graph, it's hard to interpret. It shows that each site is highly variable each year. And this is largely due to a lot of things: weather, predation, but that kind of dotted line is our marker for performance. And we really need to have the population performing above that if there's any chance for the population maintaining and recovering. So the final slides here, what do we take away from this at the moment? The programme is not a fix for a lot of the pressures and constraints faced by the hen harrier within the wider landscape. That image to your left is the Stacks to Mullergate Mountains, and it's the habitat map. It shows you how heavily fragmented that site is with forestry, which is the main pressure on hen harrier. It's a pilot project, so it has limitations in terms of budget, and there can't really be an expectation that you would have a positive population level effect so soon. This is something that will require a holistic approach and long-term funding. We are just trying to prove the concept works, which I think we have done so far in the last few years. And the programme is a very, very small part of the overall landscape scale conservation measures required to save the hen harrier. So we're looking at changes to forestry practices, removal of forestry, converting it back to bog. All these things are going to contribute a really important part to the future of the hen harrier. Our final slide is, well, are we meeting objectives so far? In providing habitat quality for the hen harrier, that is obviously an ongoing thing. We are able to analyse slight changes and improvements in habitat across the board, which is really encouraging. What we can say is that as a concept, we have proved it can be operated and administered very efficiently and scaled up to a much larger programme and for a much longer period. In our third objective, fostering the positive relations, I would have to say that in the programme's experience, the attitudes in farmers that we met initially when we started out has been radically changed. There has been a huge surge in positivity and positive feedback so far, so we hope to keep that up. And that's where we're at now. We have another couple of years left to go, and we'll be hoping for much more success with the hen harrier and working hard with farmers to maximise payments and maximise delivery of our ecosystem services. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Ryan. That was fascinating. We're going to move on now to our next speakers. So Ryan, can I just ask you to stop sharing your screen, please?
Thanks very much.
And Kathryn, if you want to share your screen while I read your intro. So delighted to welcome Kathryn Finney. Kathryn is the Irish Breeding Curlew Project Manager, EIP Project Manager, which is a European innovation partnership similar to the Hen Harrier Programme. She's an agri-environment specialist. She has worked with breeding waders, scheme design, specialist advisory, habitat management, and predator control. She has designed a number of nationally adopted breeding wader schemes and results-based schemes. And she's going to talk to us tonight about her work with the curlew. Over to you, Kathryn. Thank you.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I'm delighted to be joining you. My name is Kathryn Finney. I work for BirdWatch Ireland, who are the lead partner in the Irish Breeding Curlew EIP. So the Irish Breeding Curlew EIP, it's a multi-partnership project between BirdWatch Ireland, the Irish Natura Hill Farmers Association, Teagasc, and the Great Partridge Trust. And it's funded by the Department of Agriculture through the Agriculture and Innovation Programme. This programme funds locally led schemes, and the whole premise of them is to promote local solutions to specific issues. And in our case, it's the decline of breeding curlew. The whole premise of the project is to design and develop agri-environmental solutions and agri-environmental schemes that can be rolled out nationally and included in the next CAP. In CAP 2020, it's delayed slightly. So it's a 3.5-year project. It's very small in comparison to the Hen Harrier. It's a €1 million budget, but it's a significant funding stream. And we're operating in 2 pilot areas. So you'll see from the map all these red dots. These red dots are kind of the main concentrations of breeding curlew in Ireland as it currently stands. So we're operating in the South Lough Corrib in County Galway and the South Leitrim Bogs in County Leitrim. And the reason we are operating in both of those 2 distinct geographical locations is because they both represent habitats that are important habitats for breeding curlew. So in the South Leitrim Bogs, it's damp rushy pasture and bogland, and in South Lough Corrib, it's wet grassland, lowland wet grassland. So we do have some knowledge gaps when it comes to curlew, but we know an awful lot about them. And here in Ireland and in the UK, we do know an awful lot about what the needs of curlew and other breeding wader species. We know that they have a relatively short breeding season. They breed between April and July. They're long-lived birds. They live up to about 15 years. They're ground nesting species. But they don't really make a nest. They just make a kind of an egg cup depression in the grass, and they lay 4 eggs. If they lose their eggs, they will relay. However, if they lose their chicks, they will not attempt to breed again. Once the chicks hatch, they leave the nest cup immediately. As soon as all 4 chicks are hatched, they leave the nest cup. And they are tiny, just beautiful little things, big balls, just tiny little balls of fluff on big long legs. And once they leave the nest, the chicks are actually responsible for feeding themselves. The adults don't feed them at all. The adults simply brood them when the weather is cold, they lead them to good feeding spots, and they help protect them and keep an eye out for predators. It takes about roughly in and around 35 to 38 days between hatching and fledging. So there's an awful lot can go wrong in that time frame. And generally, by the time, by mid-July, all fledglings, all breeding has finished. So it's a relatively short breeding season. The breeding habitat, curlew are very much a farmland bird and a bird of the uplands. They like unimproved and semi-improved pasture. As I said, damp rushy pasture. They need like upland and lowland bogs and wet grassland. And in order to breed, they need a nice mixed sward height. They like to lay their eggs and have their nest in a tussock or a patch of longer vegetation that provides a little bit of cover. But they also need areas of short grass as well. And that's so that the chicks can feed. The chicks can move through it easily. As I said, they're only just tiny balls of fluff with big long legs, and that those chicks can find the invertebrates, the ground dwelling invertebrates that they feed on easily. Also, one of the anti-predator strategies the curlew has is that when it is sitting on its nest, it keeps a really good scan in the surrounding area for any predators approaching it. And if it sees a predator, it leaves its nest, it leaves the eggs immediately. And it makes it very, very hard for that predator to find those eggs when it's maybe left the nest 500 meters away. So there's kind of 2 reasons. If the grass becomes very, very, very long, they may abandon, although curlew are very tolerant of longer grass. As a general rule of thumb, just like any of the wader species, they will not nest within roughly about 50 meters of trees or scrub. And that's because trees and scrub provide habitat for the predators that target their nests and chicks. So they try and avoid these types of areas. Curlew need soft mud for probing, and that's what their big long bill is for. They probe into the soil and feed on invertebrates that live in the soil. However, the chicks need nice, wet, muddy pools and patches of muddy ground in order to feed. And that's, if you think about a wet, muddy puddle in the middle of summer, it's full of invertebrates. So this provides important chick feeding habitat. Unfortunately, the Eurasian curlew is in severe decline right across its range in Europe, and no more so than in Ireland, where it's 78%, if not going higher than that as it currently stands. The declines of the Eurasian curlew have been so pronounced that the species is now listed as near threatened with global extinction. And this is a real, very, very real threat. There are at least 2 other species of curlew that have gone extinct in the last kind of 30, 50 years. So it's a real threat that these birds will go extinct, and they're in real danger of going extinct as a breeding species in Ireland within the next 10 to 15 years if we cannot halt the declines in their breeding population. We will, of course, continue to have winter visitors, but we get a lot of curlew into Ireland that come here to overwinter because of our mild climate, and then they return to their breeding grounds in Northern Europe and Northern Scandinavia in summer. But our Irish population is in real danger of going extinct as a breeding species. And just to give you an example of how pronounced these declines have been, these are the results of the bird atlases. So this is the bird atlas, the 1972 bird atlas, and all these red dots constitute a curlew breeding pair. And in the 1972 bird atlas, it was estimated there were 8,000 pairs nationally. By the 93 breeding bird atlas, there was about 2,000 pairs. And then the last breeding bird atlas in 2011, there was only 180 pairs. And this is quite catastrophic as a decline since the 1970s. And on the back of the results of the 2011 atlas, NPWS carried out a national breeding curlew survey between 2015 and 2017. And unfortunately, the results weren't better, they were worse. It now stands that we have a total of 135 pairs nationally in Ireland. And these dots all constitute a curlew pair. About 63% of our curlew, our last remaining pairs of curlew, are on bog sites. And about 37% are on farmland. 56% of these pairs all occur on designated sites, so SPAs or SACs, and it just shows the importance of these sites for breeding curlew. However, none of these sites are actually designated for curlew, and curlew are not on the qualifying interest on any of these sites. While it does show you how important these sites are, it's more of a mark of how the habitats and how the land in these designated sites has not suffered the same intensification. And in actual fact, the fact that there are no curlew are not a qualifying interest can sometimes make it incredibly difficult to prioritise them for work in these areas over something that maybe is the qualifying interest or is the reason for the designation. So why are the declines so severe? It's quite catastrophic, that level of decline since the 1970s. And I suppose what we're really seeing now is a factor of the fact that these birds are long-lived birds. So if you just carry out population monitoring, it will look like the population is stable and it's fine. But if there's no recruitment and there is no young coming into that population, eventually you reach a point where the aging population starts to die off and there's nothing to replace them. The declines of curlew, we know what's going wrong with them largely, and it really falls into two key elements, and that is loss and fragmentation of breeding habitat and an increase in predation. And this is ringing true for the UK and for a lot of other sites across Europe. There's been a phenomenal amount of research done on curlew and other breeding waders, and we know that these are the factors that are driving their declines. So just to look at what's been going on since the 1970s, well, we've got huge changes in agricultural practices since the 1960s and 70s. And these just are a few examples of the agricultural pressures. We've got the drainage and receding of grassland, and that tends to go hand in hand with an increase in fertilizer usage. And if you look at that, that's a huge, huge increase up till the 2000s. And of course, increased fertilizer usage, it makes this word very, very strong and very uniform and not very invertebrate friendly. So it doesn't have the same amount of invertebrates in it. So not alone is it very difficult for the chicks to move through a big thick sward, it's also very difficult for them to find the invertebrates they feed on. They probably won't have they don't have the same amount of invertebrates to feed on. And also, even at a very basic level, the eggs aren't designed to be camouflaged against a bright green field. They're designed to be camouflaged against a species-rich grassland. Again, between the 1947 and 1977, think about it, 25,000 hectares of agricultural land was drained, and this practice continued right into the 80s and has possibly tailored off a little bit, but there's a huge percentage of the Irish farmland that has been drained in the last 30-40 years. Ryan touched on it a little bit on his presentation. In the uplands and in more marginal landscape, there tends to be high nature value landscape. These damp brushy pasture areas or lowland wet grassland areas, these tend to be the areas that are maybe not quite as economically viable from a farming perspective, and land abandonment can occur here, and that's a real problem in certain sites. On other sites, it's overgrazing can have a real problem. And if you take that overgrazed field, there's nowhere for that bird that curlew to nest, or for its chicks to kind of move around, find some invertebrates, and also have a little bit of cover from aerial predators. And of course, burning goes without saying. It can be disastrous. It tends to occur right in the point when the curlew are sitting on eggs or have very young chicks. There's also huge pressures from land use change, and this is the direct loss and fragmentation of habitat. For instance, research has shown that where wind farms are developed, it can displace breeding curlew, and they haven't been shown to return in these areas. It has been shown that afforestation in a curlew breeding area or in a breeding area not alone causes a loss of habitat, breeding habitat for that curlew, because if you remember, they won't nest or breed close to trees or scrub, but it also provides habitat for predators, and there's increased numbers of foxes and crows and other predators in that afforestation. But it's been found that the effect on breeding curlew and other ground nesting bird species is actually really pronounced within at least up to a kilometre, if not more, from the edge of that afforestation area. So it impacts on the level of predation in the surrounding landscape. We know that 90% of raised bogs and 72% of blanket bogs have been lost to commercial extraction. And for the sites that are kind of privately owned bogs or not commercially, many of them are not designated, and the government is struggling to regulate commercial extraction on non-designated sites. And of course, the timing of extraction is also a problem, because turf cutting tends to occur right in the middle of the peak breeding season. The disturbance alone can make the birds more vulnerable to predation or through loss of habitat. So as you can see, it's quite overwhelming, the amount of factors going at play here and the amount of things going wrong for them. And what's really striking about this for me is, for a bird that nests in a whole range of habitats, they are under pressure in every single habitat that they breed on. They're being assaulted in every which way. There's no one habitat that we can point to that curlew breed in that is not facing huge pressures and huge threat to their breeding population. So it can be quite overwhelming. And in addition, we have government policies, expand the number of wind farms, and of course this is absolutely welcome and supported from a climate change perspective. They do need to be properly targeted, however, and they need to be sensitively zoned so that they're not being constructed in areas of of importance for curlew or other important species. Increase the forest cover area, and again, this is something that is absolutely welcomed and is welcomed from a climate change perspective. But again, it needs to be properly targeted. And this is just an extract. The farmers who stand to benefit are those likely to plant land that is marginal for agriculture, but which is highly productive for forestry. But many of these areas are high nature value farmland areas, and they support rich biodiversity. So they may be uneconomically, maybe from an agricultural and intensive agricultural perspective, but if that is all we value our agricultural industry for, then that is obviously a problem. But agriculture provides so much more. The species in Ireland and the type of landscapes and habitats and species that are supported in Ireland, they have evolved alongside agriculture. A sustainable agriculture, yes. A high nature value agriculture system, yes. But these areas are important. Food Harvest 2020, this is a quote from Teagasc. Almost half of the agricultural land in Ireland would benefit from reclamation and or drainage. And while that might be true, food is not the only agricultural output. Biodiversity is supported by agriculture. Carbon sequestration is supported by agriculture. So we have to think outside the box and look and view farming and agriculture as just not a single enterprise system, which is just food. On top of all of this, we have increasing predator populations. So we know that for many species of predator, their populations are increasing, and that is because of land use change and changes in land management has favoured some species over others, and quite often some of those species are predator species. In addition, we have new predators. I mean, in my lifetime alone, we now have mink. I mean, mink is a widespread breeding species in the wild, not when I was a child. So we have the predator populations are increasing.
Sorry, 1 minute, Kathryn, please.
Right, okay. So here just to run through, so populations, right, okay, sorry. So we know what we need for productivity for a stable population. And what the Curlew EIP are doing about this. Well, first of all, we're working together with the farmers to develop local solutions. Ryan has touched on the results-based scheme, so we also operate a results-based measure, and we support our farmers in achieving the top marks that they can. So we provide specialist advisory to them, and we support them and help them along the way, because the higher payment field that they get means that we are getting higher quality habitat for curlew. We have a capital works programme where we look to help farmers and fund farmers in removing scrub or creating chick feeding habitat. And we're going to work with local contractors to train them and certify them so that the farmers, if this is rolled out nationally, we can point them to people who know how to create these features. We're trialling landscape scale improvements on adjacent land, and this is very significant because it means that we can carry out these works on land that's adjacent as field that's in the scheme, but that will benefit the breeding curlew by removing predator habitat. We're carrying out predator management. So we've got curlew keepers protecting the last remaining pairs. We're removing predator habitat in key breeding areas, and we're trialling the use of temporary predator fences around nest sites. We're also trialling a conservation keepering agri-environmental scheme. We're looking at new technologies. There's still more we can learn about curlew. And for instance, finding nests can be very invasive and difficult to do. So this year, we're hoping to carry out some satellite tagging and some night vision drone work to learn more about our species, and also to see, can we test new non-invasive technologies to locate nests accurately so that we can go in and fence them from predators. And most importantly, we're working in cooperation. An EIP is a multi-partnership project. We're developing and trialling new types of agri-environmental measures, and we're listening to the farmers and including them in the design process. We're working with local advisory groups made up of all the key local stakeholders in the area, and we're taking on board their ideas and their suggestions and tailoring these schemes to the unique habitats and locations where they're located. We're working with the Department of Agriculture and NPWS on the practicalities of implementing curlew agri-environmental measure, because a lot of these works and a lot of these sites, they're designated. So carrying out practical capital works or measures, they need a whole host of permissions. So we need to make sure that the people carrying out, the farmers, are aware of what the designations are, and that the works are carried out in a sensitive manner that's not going to cause any damage to the designated features or to the sites. But we're also working with the department about streamlining the process so that if this was rolled out nationally, that we can have a system where you have lots of farmers looking for these permissions and it runs through the process smoothly. We're liaising with other projects nationally and internationally, the NPWS Curlew Conservation Project, the CAB project in Northern Ireland dealing with curlew, and our BirdLife international partners in the UK and across Europe. So what does a sustainable curlew population need? It needs farmers farming. It needs family farms farming in a sustainable manner on high nature value landscape. And these farmers need to be supported with specialist advisory so that they're helped to achieve this, that they can draw on our information and our expertise. They're given advisory and training, and they're helped along the way to try and produce for breeding curlew habitat. An effective capital works programme and management of depredation. We need the development of good links between local stakeholders, and we need to be supported by the national and local policies. Just to leave you with this, currently, what we have in terms of fledglings per year is roughly in about 26 fledglings per year. That's from 135 pairs, each having 4 eggs each year. So that, as you can see from that graph, the population is just in free fall. If we can get to 50 fledglings per year, the population will stabilize. However, if we can get to 60 chicks per year, the population will start to increase and recover. And surely out of 135 pairs, with the measures being put in place, we have to be able to achieve that in the next few years. This is our target, this is our aim, that we will get a really sustainable agri-environmental scheme up and running and rolled out nationally, and that this will be the result. And our children and our grandchildren will have breeding curlew. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kathryn. That was wonderful. Fantastic talk. We're going to move on to our last presentation of the evening from John Carey. Can we see you, John? Are you there?
I am here, Porrick. I just said I'd keep my camera off, keep the bandwidth running.
Good man. While you're getting yourself set up there, Dr. John Carey is the project manager of the Corncrake LIFE project, which is a new EU LIFE-funded initiative working to enhance corncrake habitat in Donegal, Mayo and Galway. John is a graduate of NUI Galway and has worked in nature conservation in Ireland with the National Parks and Wildlife Service as a ranger and as an ecologist with the NPWS Agri-Ecology Unit, which, amongst many other things, develops specialist farm plans for biodiversity protection. And John has also worked in South Africa, Kenya and Leitrim, of all the exotic places in the world. So we're looking forward to your talk, John, whenever you're ready.
Thanks, Porrick. Just to confirm there, can you see my full screen?
We cannot.
Or are you seeing? You can't. Okay, are you seeing the smaller screen?
No, I can't see your face and I can't see your screen.
Okay, hang on now. Is that, you should see it now?
Yes, yep, there we go.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks a million, Porrick. Apologies for that, everyone. Thanks everyone for tuning in tonight. Yeah, my name is John Carey and I'm the project manager of a new EU LIFE project called Corncrake LIFE, which has a very convenient title because it's about corncrake. Tonight, I'd like to talk to you about, just to give you a bit of an overview, I'll give you a bit of an introduction to the corncrake, which is a species that for some people certainly doesn't need an introduction, but it's a species that's also been lost to an entire generation of Irish people. I'd like to talk about its biology and its ecology to set the scene. Then I'll go into its current status, have a look at ongoing conservation actions, give you a bit of an overview of the Corncrake LIFE project, which has just started, and then a brief summary. So, Seoiad an Tréanach, this is the corncrake. It's an iconic species in Ireland. It would be very, very well known. I mean, such was the ubiquity of the corncrake across Ireland that my own father, who lives in a small village in Sligo, described it, and I quote, he said, there was whales of them around the place. There was so many that you could see them running around the local graveyard. Now, mind you, that was 60 years ago, and things have certainly changed since. And I think possibly that it was that ubiquity and the timing of their demise and their decline that it became a great thing of sadness in Ireland. And their loss has been lamented by many, many people, especially of a certain vintage. So the corncrake is a bird that is little seen. And indeed, I seen someone online the other day that remarked that they didn't think that the corncrake flew. Well, the corncrake certainly does fly. It is a sub-Saharan migrant. And this wonderful photograph I actually got hold of today, it shows the corncrake in flight. And you can see it's got these wonderful long chestnut colored wings that kind of give a clue to its long distance migratory habit. Biologically and ecologically speaking, it's actually quite a fascinating creature. It's about the size of a blackbird. It's not the size of a hen pheasant, like many people remark. It's actually significantly smaller than that. And it's more closely related to moorhens and coots and rails. In fact, it belongs to the Rallidae family. And the corncrake is actually known as the landrail in many other countries. Its overwintering behavior, like I said, it's a sub-Saharan migrant. So it leaves Ireland in the autumn and moves into sub-Saharan Africa. And its breeding range, if you have a look here, the area in green is the corncrake's breeding range in Europe and Eurasia. And for a long time, the corncrake was red listed. It was considered an endangered species until someone went out into Eastern Europe and into the steppe region of Eurasia and found a couple of million of them. And then they realized, well, it's not quite that endangered. So it was taken off the IUCN list. But in Western Europe, the bird is seriously endangered. Its number has declined so drastically. If you look at the wintering range in dark blue there, you can see most of the birds overwinter down in Southeast Africa in kind of taking advantage of the savanna and grassland biomes that you find down there. But you'll also notice there's a couple of blue dots on the western part of sub-Saharan Africa. So there's records of birds from Angola and the Congo. Now, this is actually very, very important in our story of the corncrake, because back in 2011, about 50 Scottish birds were geotagged on the Isle of Coll. And when 6 of them were recovered, what they discovered was the Scottish birds actually spent the winter not in Southeast Africa at all, but down in the Congo, down in the western plains of the Congo. And I mean, if you stand on Malin Head of a summer's evening and you're listening to a corncrake, you can look across and you can see Islay just over the water. So the Scottish birds and the Irish birds, it's a fair bet that we're talking about a bit of a meta population here. They're very, very close to one another. So bears the question, do our own Irish birds go down into the Congo every winter, which is fascinating in itself, because this could be a very distinct population. So to understand the challenge facing the corncrake, to understand its demise and understand the challenge ahead in terms of its conservation, you have to understand its life cycle and its ecology. The birds arrive back in Ireland. Now, dates can vary by up to about 3 weeks, depending on environmental and external factors. But the first clutch is usually laid around mid-May. Now, at this stage, when the birds arrive back, they preferentially seek out patches of what we refer to as early cover. And early cover is characterized by herbaceous canopy-forming plants like nettles and cow parsley and yellow iris and canary reedgrass and a few others. So the male, he calls all night with his very distinctive call. He attracts the females in. He might prepare several nests, but the female only chooses one. And in it, she lays 8 to 12 eggs. And those eggs are laid one a day. And when she's finished laying, she begins her incubation. And the incubation lasts about 16 to 19 days. The eggs all hatch synchronously. So even though they're laid on different days, they hatch synchronously. And this is a fairly typical strategy for short-lived birds, because the corncrake only lives for 3 or 4 years in the wild. And they have a very high attrition rate. I mean, this is a bird that travels 14,000 kilometers a year. It nests on the ground. It's the size of a blackbird. So their attrition rate is fairly high. So when the chicks hatch, the mother cares for them for about 10 days, and then they become independent. They're very, very precocial. And those independent chicks go off and do their own thing. Here's the chicks. They're just these gorgeous little dark balls of fluff, the perfect size for eating if you're a corvid or a fox. And that's another issue that the corncrake faces. But after 44 days post-hatching, these birds are independent, they're fully fledged, and they depart and go back to sub-Saharan Africa. But our story doesn't end there, because the corncrake is a double brooded species. The female then lays a second clutch of eggs, and this time she preferentially moves from herbaceous early cover into meadows, into nice pastures and meadows with long vegetation over 20 centimeters long. This provides the animal with cover, with forage. Now, she lays this second clutch of eggs. It goes through the same process. She cares for the chicks slightly longer on the second brood, and then they depart. They're ready to go. They're independent and ready to go by the end of August into September. Now, the third and final part of the life cycle of the bird at this point, and we're talking about the female because the male is effectively a sperm donor, she has to undergo her molt. And when she's doing that, she's extremely vulnerable because she cannot fly. Now, if you look at the spread of the bird's breeding cycle there, it's quite long. And this is its ecological niche, is to try and get 20 chicks away to fulfill the population requirement. Now, traditionally in Ireland, the meadows would have been managed late in the summer. And that would have been done manually using scythes and everything else. And then it moved into more mechanical means. And as soon as we went into mechanical harvesting of hay, the corncrake population began to decline, slowly at first, but then as we increased mechanization, as we increased intensity, that sped up dramatically. And the other thing we're very, very good at in Ireland is grassland management. We have scienced the hell out of grassland management to the point now where grass is being saved for forage in early May. So the overlap between the pressure on the corncrake's habitat and its need to breed is absolutely immense. So if we take this and we break it down and we think about this shift in agricultural activity that has happened in the last 50 or 60 years, particularly since the 70s, we've seen a shift away from traditional farming practices that might have been mixed farming, where you would have had hay meadows, pasture, a bit of tillage ground, a bit of horticulture, mixed activities on a small scale on everyone's farm. And that shifted then in two directions. One was to increased intensification, especially intensification of grassland management towards silage production, but also towards very intensive grazing. And that was, it's worked, as you know, the fields are worked right up to the very, very edge. That leaves very, very little space for wildlife, and particularly for a bird like corncrake. But on the other hand, you had socioeconomic pressures as well. And a lot of the corncrake's traditional sites, especially on the west coast, like the islands, they were depopulated. People left them to move to the mainlands. So those island systems, island agricultural systems, which are the real kind of rundale systems, were abandoned. And you ended up with massive mats of rank grassland, which if you're a grassland bird that nests on the ground, it's not much good to you. So when you take these factors and you look at them then very objectively, what you've had for a species like the corncrake is direct loss of optimal habitat, coupled to this overall landscape simplification. That is bad news when those two things are beginning to accumulate together. What that leads to then is this effect of ecological traps, where the birds end up seeking out preferential habitat, but that habitat is of very, very poor quality. What goes with that is more stochastic pressures. It makes the birds more vulnerable to external factors, such as extreme weather events, predation, just to name two. What does this culminate in? It culminates into a species literally and figuratively on the edge. The corncrake has been driven out of Ireland almost entirely and pushed out into its current distribution on the west and northwest coast. Remembering that this was a bird that would have been found in most fields across Ireland 60 years ago. So what is the current status? Well, as you can imagine, it's not good. Back in 1968, there was an estimated about 4,000 calling male corncrakes. There could have been a lot more than that. It wasn't the most accurate census that was done. By 1978, that had dropped to about 1,500. By 88, we had less than 1,000. By 98, we were down to about 150. And since 1998, the birds have reached this nadir. They have bottomed out, and they've been in that ever since. The reason they haven't gone extinct as a breeding species is probably down to a combination of this species' actual resilience and the conservation efforts that have been put in place. But overall, the current status is this bird is in decline. It's a priority species for under the Birds Directive. It's seen a population loss of 90% since 1978, a range contraction of 93%, and the population estimate for the last 5 years is between 150 to 160, based on calling males, because it's an elusive species, so the calling male is a proxy. You've also seen this dramatic shift in the species range. I mean, a 93% shift. Now, in 1993, the Shannon Callows was the hub for corncrake in Ireland. There were 88 calling male birds recorded in the Callows in 1993. In the Moy catchment in Mayo, there was 24 calling males recorded. If we fast forward now to the distribution over the past sort of 10 years, the Moy population, that went extinct in 1999. That was extirpated. The last bird was heard calling there in 1999. And in the Shannon Callows, the former stronghold, the birds are now extirpated as well. There are no birds left in the Callows since 2015, which is extremely tragic. that little purple dot you can see there, I live about 2 kilometers from where that bird was heard calling in 2011. And as I look out my office window during the day and I see the callows below me at Kilglasslough, it's just really, really sad to think that that callow should be a cacophony of sound during the summer, and there's nothing in it. So what kind of conservation actions have been in place over the years? Well, if we focus on the ones that are there currently, there is a dedicated action for corncrake within the current GLAS scheme that farmers can apply for. And it focuses on things such as delayed mowing, early and late cover for the birds, which is crucial to their life cycle, and sward height. The birds need long sward. They need grass and cover that's about 20 centimeters long. And GLAS hasn't been very successful. We don't need to go into the details of it, but only about 10% of the GLAS parcels have corncrake associated with them. Another player in the game currently is that there's an annual corncrake conservation programme that's carried out by the National Parks and Wildlife Service. Now, this focuses on undertaking the national census of corncrake across the country, but the field workers who undertake that census also have a mandate to offer a grant scheme to farmers to mow corncrake friendly, which means to mow from the centre out rather than from the centre in. Mowing from the centre out allows the birds to escape into cover. They also work to ask landowners to delay their cutting to later in the season, and there's payments associated with that. The annual scheme as well, they try and maintain some areas of early and late cover, and there's an element of predator control that goes with it. The other main corncrake conservation action is the MPWS Agroecology Unit have a targeted farm plan scheme for corncrake. It focuses on the development of species-rich grassland, on late mowing, and really high-quality early and late cover creation. One of its great successes is the fact that it focuses on regular advisory. The planners have constant contact with the farmers, and there's a lot of ecological input then. However, all of these schemes and plans, they have limitations. They're limited by the targeting, they're limited by scale, and they're limited by capacity. So enter stage left, a new project, the Corncrake LIFE project, which is on the back of a real pressing need to try and have a coordinated approach to corncrake conservation throughout Ireland. The project received funding at the end of 2019. It was supposed to start in 2020, but there was various holdups, and then COVID hit town. So we're now starting in January 2021. The project's title is also its main objective, which is to improve corncrake conservation status in Ireland by the enhancement of the SPA network and the surrounding farmland. That is crucial. The surrounding farmland to the SPA network is crucial. Our working title is Corncrake LIFE or Trainach LIFE. It has a budget of 5.9 million, will run for 5 years. 4.3 million of this is an EU contribution, and the rest of it is coming from the project beneficiaries. The coordinating beneficiary is the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage via the MPWS, and the associate beneficiaries are the Department of Ag, Photo Wildlife Park, GMIT, and Údarás na Gaeltachta. The project scope, it will operate across 8 areas, and these 8 project sites encompass 9 of the corncrake special protection areas in Ireland. And there are 10 corncrake SPAs in Ireland. Number 10 is the Shannon Callows. The Callows is not included in the project footprint. The overall operational area is about just under 4,500 hectares. The adjacent supporting farmland is crucial and will be part of the project's footprint because together with the SPA, it supports 85, if not 90% of the current corncrake population. And these areas, we refer to them as corncrake catchments. The project's targets are to try and get about 1,000 hectares under high quality corncrake management. And 95% of that will either be through management agreements via a results-based agri-environmental payment scheme or under lease. And we also have a provision there for about 5% strategic land purchases to build really, really good core areas for the birds. We want to create at least 50 hectares of early and late cover because there's a paucity of that across the Corncrake catchments. And while not an objective of the project, we do have an ambition to try and increase the population by about 20% based on the 28 baseline. So that'd be about to get 177 calling males. So what are the project actions? The first and foremost one is support. You'll never have a conservation project without support from local landowners, local farmers, and the local community. For that reason that we have actually 2 community engagement officers working on the project. Knowledge exchange is crucial because the same as for Curlew or for Hen Harrier, to manage for corncrakes, there's specialized knowledge needed, and that knowledge needs to be exchanged with landowners and farmers, and indeed with the local community, because a lot of those people will be able to contribute to the management. The concrete conservation actions that will be targeted on active lands, and by active lands, I mean lands that are actively farmed. What we need to do there is create more early and late cover, like you can see in this photograph, strips of it. What we need to also promote is extend corncrake friendly mowing, make sure it's happening, make sure that people are rewarded and compensated for carrying out corncrake friendly mowing. We also need to encourage increased late season refugia. We need to increase the amount of margins that are left in fields that are cut for silage or for hay.
John, please.
Thanks, Porrick. On non-active lands, we need to focus on grassland restoration. There's a lot of rank areas within the catchments. We need to reinstate traditional farming practices and get these grasslands restored. And in terms of complementary actions, we'll be looking at things like thermal imaging, flushing bars fitted to mowers, predation risk management, and there'll be an element of rescue there because at this stage, every single bird counts. Just to focus for a minute now on the results-based payment scheme, we'll be designing and piloting a results-based payment scheme. We've seen 2 examples of it already. Our results-based payment scheme will focus on a whole farm approach rather than cherry-picking plots. We need a whole farm approach because farms are enterprises that are managed at a whole farm level. We'll give baseline rewards based on habitat condition and type. We'll give additional rewards based on corncrake specific actions within plots. And we want our participants to get 10 out of 10. And for them to get 10 out of 10, they will need to be supported financially for certain capital works. When considering any results-based payment scheme, however, our one will be for corncrake, but ultimately it'll be for far more than that. Because if you're managing successfully for corncrake, like the farmer that is managing for corncrake in this particular photograph in Donegal, he is also managing water because that is an extraction point for the local community. Very intensive grassland all around it. Look at his meadow. He is not nutrifying. He's protecting water. He's protecting broader biodiversity. He's protecting soil. He is sequestering carbon. This is the kind of ambition that RBAPs probably need to get into. We might be focusing on corncrake, but we're delivering a whole range of public goods and services. So in summation, when it comes to the corncrake, huge population loss, huge range contraction, now limited to the west and northwest. This has entirely been driven by habitat loss and change in farming practices. This is a very resilient species. It probably could have gone extinct 30 years ago. The conservation measures needed to protect it are largely identified, and the mechanism to deliver that is now hopefully on its way. Gurumaiha give to everyone. If you want to know more about the project, you can follow us on Twitter for the time being, or you can drop us an email to corncrakelife@chg.gov.ie.
Thanks so much, John. That was great. Now we're coming up to, I want to end this webinar at 8:30. So we've run over a little bit on the talk. So, but we do have time for a couple of questions. And so you are all back on the screen. If Ryan is still there, Ryan, could you put your screen back on? I'm just going to start with you, if that's all right. There you are. So look, I'm going to collate. Obviously, we're not going to have time to go through all the questions, but I've been looking over them, and there's some general themes that are coming out. And I imagine a lot of the issues relating to the three different birds are common. And Ryan, Paul Milne asked a question about brood management for hen harriers, and he said it's a technique being used in the UK. I presume that means is it like supervising the nests, do you know, and controlling predators? He's wondering, is that something that could be done here in Ireland for hen harriers?
Yeah, brood management is where chicks are taken from one nest in one location and then released somewhere else. It is a controversial practice, especially at the moment in England, which has been used to try and increase the numbers of hen harriers in lowland England, taking them away from driven grouse moors where they're heavily persecuted. So it's controversial in a way that it's a conservation action that's been licensed, not for conservation purposes, but to placate the criminal activities associated with driven grouse shooting. In Ireland, brood meddling probably wouldn't come under that term. You could probably use the term kind of relocation, and it would be something that could work, especially in places in maybe County Mayo or Connemara that would have suitable habitat. But because of the nature of hen harrier, their ties to their breeding quarters, and because their distribution is shrinking, it's highly unlikely that hen harriers will be expanding in the near future and recolonise areas like the Wicklow Mountains or Connemara. So in practice, it could work, but in terms of a licensing point of view, I doubt very much that it would fulfil the criteria required for a kind of reintroduction programme nationally, especially when a lot of the threats and pressures still exist in Ireland, which is extensive conifer forestry and the habitat loss and predation risk associated with that.
Okay, thanks, Ryan. Kathryn, a lot of people are asking, maybe it's a twofold question. Are these programs, and maybe just answer for the Curlew one, is it just for farmers or is it for other landowners, number one? And number two, a lot of people asking, you know, we're obviously looking at systemic issues here, but are there things that individual farmers or landowners can do on their own patch of land?
Okay, but no, that's very much two distinct questions. So I suppose the first of that is, we're only, because this is a small scale, it's only a €1 million budget, it's a small scale trial pilot scheme to design and trial an agri-environmental scheme. So it's only operational, or the scheme is only open to farmers in those particular areas, and we're prioritising the farmers in and around where the curlew are breeding in those project areas. However, we are trialling, and this is quite important. We are trialling entering non-farmers or farmers who don't have land in the scheme to maybe carry out the capital works programme, so the removal of predator habitat. So that's quite significant in that I think it's, to my knowledge, it's the first time an agri-environmental scheme has allowed you to spend their money on, say, either indirectly on land that's not in the scheme, or for landowners who are not actually farmers. So we're very much trialing that approach. So that's going to improve the habitat, say where there's a lot of predator habitat in the landscape or in the fields or in the land immediately adjacent to a breeding site that's not in the scheme. And the other question are there elements or are there things that farmers nationally can be doing to safeguard breeding curlew on their land? Absolutely, there is. And generally, we have a rule of thumb, which is they need, while they need grazing animals, they need livestock to create the sward that they like to breed in. also need to balance that with the risk of trampling from the livestock. So as if you put in place a kind of low intensity grazing with a kind of a low level stocking in those fields, so you're producing that kind of patchy sward with areas of long grass and areas of short grass, but with a limited or a kind of a low intensity stocking rate, then you'll do an awful lot for the birds immediately nesting or in the vicinity, nesting or chick rearing in that field. And also, if you refrain from doing any tractor operations, so no fertilizing, no topping until after the 15th of July, and for very obvious reasons, the eggs can't move at all, and the chicks are really small, so, and tractors are big and fast, and you're going to mow them out of it. We don't like fertilizer usage in these areas at all. For one, especially during the breeding season, because the sward grows and the grass grows too thick and too dominant. And it tends to favor like improved grass species, which are bright green, so the eggs aren't very well camouflaged. And as I said earlier on, it doesn't really provide good invertebrates populations in those type of intensive grassland areas. So that kind of, low input agricultural system with extensive stocking rates and a focus on producing that nice kind of mixed sward, and also refrain from draining it because they need nice damp wet areas. So big deep-sided drains are not suitable for chicks because they'll just fall into them and not be able to get back out of them. So they need nice kind of shallow-sided pools that they can just kind of dabble in and out of.
Wonderful, thank you. John, this may be overlapping a little bit with what I asked for Ryan, but Brian Hughes asked a question about, and maybe this is also related to, you showed us that the Shannon Callows now doesn't have any corncrakes in it anymore, but it's still a protected area for corncrakes. So is it an option, or are there plans to basically reintroduce corncrakes to that area?
Not in this project is the straight answer. No. We have a rescue action within the project in the event that the project team come across eggs or chicks, because every single bird counts. We want to make sure that any animals that are rescued go back to their natal area. We get asked this a lot. Is there a potential for corncrakes back in the Shannon Callows? I don't know. I'd love to see it. But Kathryn, you live right there on the Callows. Like, will they ever go back there? Who knows? Who knows? These are birds that they're fine-tuned to go back to particular areas. They have such high fidelity to their natal areas. It's incredible. Why haven't they gone back into the Moy? There's still hay meadows down there as well. Like the truth of it is they've been pushed out now to the absolute periphery of Ireland. The absolute periphery of Ireland, and the focus needs to be on protecting the populations there for now, and not trying to chase a reintroduction program until we've secured what we have at the moment. But look, any reintroduction program for any species, and corncrake being one of them, you need to make sure, and it's happened in the UK, people said it's been done in the UK, they reintroduced corncrakes. They did. They had 4,000 hectares of their own land to throw them into. If you're going to put them back in the Callows, you need to consult with the farmers within the Middle Shannon Callows, make sure that they're all up for it and that there is a strategy and everyone is on board, or else you're just going to be tossing them back into an ecological trap and they'll be doomed again.
Yeah, okay, thanks for that, John. As we come to the end, I'm just going to do one more round of the three of you, and I'm going to ask you both two questions, and maybe the first question would be a pretty easy one and quick one to answer. Number one, for the public at large, or for landowners or people, if they spot these birds in, let's say, particularly during the breeding period, where should they go to report it? And number two, what would be the one thing, well, we've got a new government now, relatively new government, what would be the one thing that you would like to see change in Ireland in the coming 3 or 4 years to benefit your pet species? Ryan, you go first.
Thanks. Can you just have one thing? We're going to need a few of those.
Well, the most important one, if you can.
I guess the most important would be the breeding season lasts maybe 4 or 5 months of the year for Hen Harrier, and this programme is a huge investment in just one small part of its annual life cycle. So to have any kind of meaningful impact on the conservation of a species, you really need to cater for its ecological requirements during the remainder of its annual life cycle, which is during the winter and non-breeding period. So if there was one thing I could ask for, it would be an equivalent programme kind of targeted specifically for the wintering areas for Hen Harrier in Ireland. And I would also like the results-based scheme that we have at the moment, the Hen Harrier programme, to be extended, not just in terms of geographically. I think a programme like this could be extended to all upland areas, all our upland SPAs, all our upland commonages. We could do so much great work through results-based programmes for upland ecosystems. And I think it would have to be long-term as well. It would have to be maybe equivalent payments that match forestry premiums, so it takes away that kind of policy conflict, and also offers stability for farmers as well, because a 5-year programme isn't long enough. You're very limited in what you can achieve, and if the programme ends, sure, there could be a risk of backsliding into more intensive practices. So I think farmers need to be given more stable income. So a 15-year programme that offers payments equivalent to the forestry premiums would be absolutely fantastic. And also a wintering scheme for Hen Harrier. If we had that, we'd be making inroads. So
very good. And if people spot Hen Harriers, who should they report it to?
We are present on social media. We have a website as well. You can send sightings in confidence, probably best via our website. We have a contact form. You can just drop your name and some details of the sighting, the date, whereabouts, behaviour, and it will be passed on to our monitoring team, and it will be checked out. So it'd be appreciated. Thanks.
Great. Okay, Kathryn.
Okay, just for where to contact us, you will find our project on the BirdWatch Ireland website. So there's links to the Curlew EIP project, and also you'll find us on Twitter. So you can report sightings either directly to the Curlew EIP or to BirdWatch Ireland, and they'll be passed on to me directly. I suppose what we'd like is, in addition to a lot of the things that Ryan has outlined, because there's a lot of overlaps between what we need, I suppose my biggest thing would be, I'd like this scheme, technically this project, the Curlew EIP, is to finish. It was only a 3-year project, so it's to finish in 2021. I'd like to see it extended for a number of years, so that we can kind of further expand our trial, that we can hopefully roll it out, maybe roll it out to other areas and nationally, and expand it out. Wish list, I suppose, you've heard a lot about these results-based schemes, and you've heard a lot about the role of the advisor and the importance of the advisor. But I think it's important to note that this sort of advisory and training that our type of schemes and our schemes are offering the farmers, it's not the norm in agri-environment. And it has really been shown across the board to actually make a real difference in how well the farmers provide for the biodiversity that the scheme is tackling, and how engaged the farmers become, and how much they get a sense of ownership of these species, and that their role as a custodian. So I think this sort of level of these type of schemes with these specialist advisors who are able to support and train the farmers, I think I would like to see that rolled out as well to all the higher biodiversity schemes nationally, not just the schemes that we're working on, but there's many other higher biodiversity schemes in the agri-environmental sphere that would benefit from that level of really intense specialist advisory. But yeah, God, the wish list could go on, but I'll stop.
John?
Yeah, the risk of sounding repetitive. First of all, if you hear or see a corncrake, you can certainly come to the project in the first instance. We'll be working hand in glove with the annual census field workers who will be folded into us. So to avoid confusion, you can just come to us and that information will go to where it needs to go. In terms of a wish list, we're at the beginning of a new RDP cycle. We're in it, and it's been designed now. And the cap is 1/3 of the EU's public money spent. I would like to see equivalent payments. I would like to see more than equivalent payments for landowners and farmers in Natura 2000 sites and in high nature value farming sites, because what the public need to realize is those landowners, those farmers are producing public goods and services. They're not just producing food, they're producing more than that, things that are completely intangible to us in terms of cost: clean water, carbon sequestration, biodiversity. COVID has taught us at least how important nature is to our well-being, mental and physical. What I would like to see is that those landowners are recognized for that, and that payments in those areas get properly targeted. And via a results-based system is certainly becoming the rule rather than the exception.
Very good, very good. A good note to end on. And here's hoping that we will see the systemic change that is needed in the coming months and years ahead. So just to close, Ryan, Kathryn, John, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us tonight. A lot of messages coming in on the chat, wishing you well with your work and congratulations, and certainly we send you all the best for the success of your various projects. And to everyone who has tuned in, thank you also for coming along and showing your interest in this important topic. Once again, I just remind you the Irish Wildlife Trust is a non-governmental charity, and please, if you want to support our work, please go to iwt.ie and join up. And the last thing to say is then good night, and we'll see you again at our next webinar, which we will be announcing in a few weeks, and I can promise you it is also an exciting one ahead. So thank you again, everybody. Thanks, and good night.
EMI, slán go fóill.
Slán.